Hey Space Cats! Welcome to the channel that looks at stuff to do with making your book, publishing and illustration. This week I'm posing the question, what effect will your story or your book have on a child's development? Are books really that vital, or are they just a form of entertainment? Let's look at what the experts say. The National Literacy Trust in the UK say it has astonishing benefits for children. Stories give them comfort and reassurance, confidence, security, as well as relaxation, happiness and fun. And if you're reading to a child and giving them your full attention and your time, it can build their self-esteem, their imagination, and as part of a bedtime routine, it can even help improve their sleeping. My own children were probably one of the last generations not to take a screen to bed with them. There just wasn't that competition. It's harder for parents and carers now. The challenge of a hectic family life and seeming lack of time can lead us to believe that reading to our children is a chore. It doesn't need to be a chore. It can be an absolute pleasure too. Plus, it's relationship building. It forges those family ties. As a child, there's nothing like having time with a favourite adult sharing a story. Let's take a look at some of the salient points. Reading to and with children from as young as birth can help children make sense of language. Not that I'm suggesting Dad bends over and reads Winnie the Pooh as Mum's trying to push the baby out. Just leave it a little while longer. Giving babies books is good for their looking skills. It helps the brain to develop the information coming from the eyes. And as they get old enough, they figure out how books work. That there is a front and a back, a right way up and an upside down. How to turn the page. It's easy to think this is just a thing that we're born with. But no, we actually have to learn those skills. And although they cannot read the words until 4 or 5 years old for most children, they can listen to the words and stories being read by another person. This helps their language skills, the context of the words and the concepts, and even how to say the words, particularly harder to pronounce words, like hospital or spaghetti, otherwise known as hospital and biscotti. What words or phrases are in your story that might help children learn? Have you made any words up? Or crucially, are there any words that you think are just going to be too difficult for your age range? Books and stories help widen a child's horizon. They enable the child to find out about their world and make sense of things. This counts for both fiction and non-fiction. In the latter, they can find out facts like what the world looks like from outer space or the life cycle of frogs. In fiction, they can learn to understand what it must have been like to be Roald Dahl's Matilda or to have a tiger come to tea. Both of these enable placement in the world. Without this positioning, a person can feel a bit wobbly, unsure where they fit in. And that brings me on to... In reading books and stories about other cultures or historical times or places in the universe, a child will come across subjects that they might not ordinarily have crossed paths with in their typical daily life. They might read a book about the Victorians and start to consider what it must have been like to live without electricity or flushing toilets, or heaven forbid, the internet. Or perhaps they might read a non-fiction book about a different religion or philosophy and have their mind expanded by the thought of people living in a totally different way to what they consider to be ordinary. Is your book specific to a culture or a time? Who is it going to impact? Books can also help not just children, people in general, to problem solve. In my local children's libraries, we now have books marked with a book to help you, and it ranges in topics from bereavement to bullying to social anxiety and well-being. It's so uplifting to know that you are not the only person to be feeling like this. And when you're a child, you have so little experience of the world that often you feel you must be the only person to ever go through something or feel a particular way. As we get older and wiser, we realise that this just isn't the case. So for that reason, books are so vital and brilliant at making children feel better about themselves and their life. Does your book cover something like this? Have you had an experience that you think might benefit a child or a group of children to realise that they are not the only one? As I mentioned briefly before, books are fantastic for brain development, and this has been extensively studied. A quick Google search and you will see that there are about 150 squillion books on brain development in children. And reading to and with children and encouraging the habit of reading has a huge effect on the brain and how it connects and grows. Just think, the brain is receiving signals from the eyes and the ears if being read to. It's using imagination and empathy, and the brain is picking up on the emotional attachment the child has, not just to the characters in the story, but also the person who is reading it to them. And feeding back into language is speech development. Anecdotally, and probably scientifically too, there is a clear difference between children who are not engaging with reading and those who are. Children who are being read to and developing their own reading habit are much more likely to have a wider vocabulary and understanding of complex language and structure. They are more likely to find punctuation easier to use, where to put full stops and commas, because they see it in the sentences they are reading. As they get older, they can see the purpose of paragraphs and why it is important to communicate effectively. Even in the age of emails and emojis, it's still really important to know and use the rules of communication that most of us live by. Reading is a huge part of this, so do make sure that you use a proofreader when you are making your book, just to avoid making any massive punctuation or spelling or typo gaffes. Your book might light a spark of creativity or imagination in your reader's mind. The plot or a character or a piece of dialogue might be the catalyst for an amazing and creative idea in their head. I'll give you an example. When I was about 16, I read a book by Stephen King, and I can't for the life of me remember which one it was. However, there was a character in it who was a children's book illustrator. And it went into some detail about what she did during the day. And I just thought, wow, I didn't even know that job existed. How amazing. Thinking back, that might have been the springboard for me getting into the career that I actually am now doing. So, shout out to Stephen King, because, you know, he needs a bit of promo. You might just think you're getting something out of your system. You know, you'd always wanted to write a children's book. But did you realise you might be having a huge effect on your reader? Next week I'll be back in the studio with a nursery rhyme all about throwing an old man down the stairs. Nursery rhymes really are weird. I'm off to get ready for my next Iron Man triathlon. I will see you next week. Nanu nanu.